my guest today, which is Miss Beverly Eakman. She's an educator of 9 years, teaching English, literature, and debate, and actually wrote English grammar curriculum. Her science and technology writing, she's the editor-in-chief at NASA's official newspaper. She was a chief speechwriter for Chief Justice Warren Burger and wrote many things for the U.S. Department of Justice. She's the author of numerous books, one of the most recent being Walking Targets, which is a sequel to her award-winning book, Cloning of the American Mind, Eradicating Morality Through Education. She's wrote many feature-length articles. She's the former executive director from 1994 to 2006 for the National Education Consortium. She's been on over 700 national radio and TV shows, expert witness and consultant. She's won many awards. The National Human Rights Award, 1995, for her book, Eradicating, where are we here? Educating for the New World Order, and also the winner of the International Human Rights Award for her third book, Cloning of the American Mind. Ms. Beverly Eakman, welcome to Red Pill Politics. It is such a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Well, it's my pleasure to be on.
Well, you have got so much experience, I almost don't know where to start. In this hour, I can tell is going to fly by so quickly. But I'd like to really quick bring my listeners up to speed on, again, what drew me to you. And as I was looking at your site over the last couple of days, I noticed on a section called Beverly's Bookshelf, you listed several of the books that you've written. And the one that attracted me to you the most is the one that's listed last on your site, and that is How to Counter Group Manipulation Tactics. And I could not believe when I saw your presentation from the Freedom Advocates website, you described verbatim what I have been experiencing here at the local level, going to these visioning sessions and planning meetings that are hosted by all these regional planning groups. And I'm really hoping that you can help us connect the dots here. And it seems that this actually plays a huge role in our public education. So I'd like you to, if you could, tell us a little bit more about yourself, because I'm sure I only just grazed the surface here. And let's talk about how the public school systems have really turned into social engineering, and how us adults have not been left out as they're doing it to us right here in our own communities. Beverly, take it away.
Well, I really got interested in this back in college. I guess I'm one of these people who just see things a little bit in a different light. And I was from Washington, D.C. originally, and went to a private school that was aimed at diplomats, so it was a kind of an international academy. And then I got transplanted in college to Lubbock, Texas, and Texas Tech. And those kids there had no idea that some of the professors that were in their classrooms were doing a job on them. And, I mean, they were bringing them into the leftist mindset, and those kids were not in that way at all. I mean, they were home and family and never been out of their small little town. So I started listening to some of the professors who obviously weren't from around there, and they were really doing a job on these kids, as I say. And I did one term paper for my adolescent psychology professor in which I iterated every single point of illogic I found in my adolescent psychology book. And surprisingly, he gave me an A and said he'd never thought about it that way. And so that kind of started me off, because I realized that nobody cared if we knew about the value of X. Nobody cared if we taught anything really in our classrooms, that it was all about being relevant and meaningful and, psychobabble, essentially. And it was adolescent psychology, educational psychology, child psychology, psychology. And I knew something was wrong. And then when I took the teacher's exam, which was about an 8-hour test, and half of it was on our opinions, then I knew something was really wrong. And you could tell by the questions how they wanted you to answer them. I don't know how many kids really, got that, but I sure got it. And so I wasn't about to answer in a way that after my parents had paid money for all that college that I was going to flunk. But on the other hand, I knew what they were looking for. So that kind of started me off. And then when I got in the classroom in California, my husband and I moved to California. And, of course, they were all involved in politics in there, but leftist politics, of course. And those kids didn't get the leftism part, but they were very highly political. It wasn't like they didn't care. They just simply had it all wrong. And so I started going to American Opinion bookstore and getting tons of film strips and books and showing the other side of the coin, basically. I showed it from both sides,
Mm-hmm.
and I got them to think about what they were actually seeing and talking about and what they were seeing on TV. And then when I got back to Washington several years later, I ditched education at that point because it wasn't for me the way that teachers were expected to be social workers. But I went into the Voice of America. I became a top speechwriter for the director there, and I had to have a top secret clearance. And one of the people that I interviewed was for the Voice of America newspaper, which was went out to, some 3,500 people, or I'm not sure of that number, but it was a very large group internationally that was with the Voice of America in foreign countries and here. And so I interviewed this fellow that I won't say his name. He has since retired and has written his own book, but even so, I won't mention his name. But he specialized in helping people defect from the Soviet Union, among other things. So one of the books that he had sitting there was called Social Psychology and Propaganda. And it was just there. And I was waiting for him. He'd gone down the hall, and I thought, well, that looks interesting, and it also looks sort of familiar. But so I just kind of was leafing through it. And when he came back, I said, could I borrow this? And he said, well, it's classified. And I went, oh. And it was soon declassified. But I said, well, I'm right down the hall. You know where I am. I said, I'll bring it right back. And I took it home, and I thought, why does this thing seem familiar? And then I knew what it was. I grabbed this book off the shelf that was called, Training for Change Agents. And it was by Ronald and Mary Havelock, married couple, I guess. And it had all sorts of behavioral psychologists in their opening, the contributors to this thing. And among the chapters was how to eradicate information and knowledge in a person, how to eradicate attitudes, how to start rumors, and it just went on. And then I looked at the Social Psychology and Propaganda book, and it was the same kind of chapters. And I went, oh. And I thought, that's why it's familiar. And then I hadn't seen it initially, but I looked on the cover of Training for Change Agents, which had, by the way, a contract number on it from what was then the Office of Education under Health, Education, and Welfare. And so that means we had federal funding involved in it. And I looked on the cover, the top cover, and it had in the background ISR. And I went, whoops, I didn't notice that. I opened the other book, and it was ISR Moscow. That is Institute for Social Relations, or Social Research, I'm sorry. And that's a Moscow outfit, which is international, so it was communist. And in the Social Psychology and Propaganda, of course, the whole front title page was in Russian. But it was translated into English, and what they had done, the reason it was classified is they had confiscated it from Grenada. So needless to say, I had a lot of reading. It was just like I couldn't let go of it. I suddenly realized this stuff is over here.
Yeah, and this is what has essentially been incorporated into our curriculums and
I
what
know.
shapes our public school
And
now.
the teachers are learning it and not even knowing they're getting this.
That was going to be one of my questions to you. Were the students that you referred to earlier at the time? I mean, were they used to critical thinking? Are the teachers that we just spoke about? I mean, did this simply go over their head, or did they know what was actually happening and what it was being shaped into?
Well, they didn't seem to be at the time. But then the NEA, you see, it was not the National Education Association, was a federal, national, not federal, but a national body. But it didn't insist that every teacher join the local, state, and national association. You could pick and choose which one you joined, if any at all. Mm-hmm. So you kind of were able to teach and kind of go out on your own, but the problem was it wasn't 5 years before they put out, I guess, a phony poll and started asking teachers whether they would support mandating that every new teacher joined all three organizations. Now, when I was in college, and that's back in Lubbock, Texas, they had already said, well, if you don't join your professional organization, you're not considered a professional. Well, this thing was anything but professional. I mean, they were putting out yellow journalism type leaflets in our boxes and everything, and it was like an us versus them, the management versus the peons, which were the teachers. And I thought, this is not professional. And it was very leftist. I could recognize that right off. Anybody that was thinking could. And so that was a real big problem because and that was one of the reasons I ended up leaving, a secondary reason, because the National Education Association was suddenly putting out all these agenda items and everything. A lot of them had nothing to do with education or schooling at all. It was simply societal, leftist things, like your what's called sustainable development now. But it was one thing after another, anything that they could think of to turn the country in a leftist direction, kind of like Berkeley was in the 60s, they would do. And the kids, they didn't get it, and a lot of the teachers, they thought they had joined that organization so that young ones that were just coming along wouldn't be paid more or as much as experienced teachers, and of course there was something to that. Mm-hmm. And that's why they joined. That was the way they roped older teachers in. What they didn't see is that the whole tenor of the country was changing in a leftist direction, and teachers were going to be swept up. The whole education establishment was going to be swept up by this.
Well, some of the worst tyrants in the world realized that you can actually control a culture by co-opting a generation of kids. They knew that to control the mind of a child from like the age of 5 to 18 was less of an investment, and rather than trying to change their mind after these things have been established.
That's right. Well, that's always been the case, and every country, dictatorship has known it, and so do religious organizations. I mean, they know that if you inculcate good morals, values, young, that's going to be helpful, and that you're more likely to get that inculcated firmly for the rest of the child's life than you are if you start when the kid's 16. So, I mean, this isn't an unknown psychological phenomenon. But on the other hand, the way the leftists were using it was not in a good direction at all, and plus it was subtle. Uh-huh. It was very subtle, and, if you weren't looking and you hadn't read books like the ones I had, you might not notice.
You know, now things drastically changed after I got out of high school, and shortly thereafter. I mean, there was just a night and day difference from what I remember as a very young child in grade school. And back then, you know, even then it was starting to change. It was in that era when it was changing, but it now has evolved to something where 2 plus 2 does not equal 4 unless there is a consensus. The reality is twisted, and the kids are pushed to create their own reality almost. So when the teachers and those that plan the curriculum provide all the little pieces to the puzzle can only be put together in their predetermined image. And the kids, regardless of how they do it, I guess it's a variant of the Delphi technique, but they get the kids to construct this predetermined conclusion on their own, so they take it as their own and move on through life, trying to incorporate this reasoning as adults. Is that kind of did I sum that up correctly?
Yes. That's exactly what's going on, and it's gotten worse over time is the problem. So now we are in the situation where all people, I don't care if they're educators or what they are, if they're in a focus group, if they're trying to do something in their community, if they're running for school board, if they're running for any kind of public office, they have got to know how to counter group manipulation tactics. And the DVD that you saw is just like an hour overview. Mm-hmm. And of course, I give seminars all over the country that are about 5 hours long on this, and then there's a manual to go with it, a manual that I put in the back of the room, and by intermission they're all gone usually. But and that's just come out in the 2011 edition because I keep having to update it just because of what you were talking about with Michael Shaw and Michael Kaufman, is that they keep doing a job on us, and they keep changing their tactics or throwing new terms out there so that you have to update what you're doing.
Yes. But you know what was uncanny is that you did that seminar 7 years ago, and as I was listening to it, not just your segment, but all segments of that series, mm-hmm. and I could not believe that so much of what was projected actually came true, and I'm seeing it in real life right now. Now, let's spend a little bit of time on this group manipulation because it is very real. I have been to several of these visioning sessions, they call them quite often, consensus meetings, stakeholder meetings, and I think the most scary one was probably the most recent one, where I went to a meeting right here in Northampton. It was on the new Valley Vision and how sustainable development is going to be incorporated right here in our region, and there was a total of 5 people that represented the 39 towns in the region. So that's scary in itself that 5 people are making these decisions for all of us and saying, yeah, we agree. And the most classic that I was to was an event 2 years ago when the CDC put on a series of 10 workshops around the country when they were trying to push the pandemic bill here in Massachusetts. They were using the swine flu scare. And it was classic. It was what you described in your lecture almost to a T, where they had 6 or 7 people at each table. They had a moderator that supposedly was a fence rider to keep us on topic, and tried very hard to shift the whole crowd into a consensus and around what they termed was a full throttle approach to vaccination. In other words, forced vaccines.
Right.
And it was classic. It was what you described, but explain to the people who may not be familiar with what's going on here what the consensus process is and some of the tricks in the language used to sway good people into doing bad things.
Well, for one thing, you have to understand that there's a moderator of the discussion, or he seems like a moderator. And they call themselves moderators, facilitators, usually. But what they are trained agitators and provocateurs. And you have, the best thing to do is if you are going to go to one of these things, find out who's funding it first of all, so that you can kind of get an idea and that's whether it's a focus group, a task force, a committee meeting, or whatever it is. Find out who the moderator is, or who's paying him, whether there might be something that the paying organization has to gain from this. Find out that kind of information first. But what he's going to do is he's going to take charge of what I call the psychological environment, and I call it, disparagingly, climate control. But you have to take the debate back from your adversary, or don't let him get it in the first place. If you don't let this guy get it in the first place, then you can talk about what you want to talk about, and your colleagues that are sitting there and hopefully not sitting together, so it looks like it's coming from all over and not just in one little group, because then they'll isolate you, ridicule you, mock you, and, you'll end up in a shouting match. So the best thing to do is first to find these details out, but if you can't, realize that moderator or facilitator that's sitting up there may, in fact, be a professional provocateur, and that he's going to try to pit one segment against one preferred segment against another that doesn't have the preferred idea, and cut you out of the discussion, basically. He will not, if you want something put out on the table, a point of discussion, that will not be on the table.
No, that's assuming that they've identified someone in the audience as being a potential troublemaker.
Yeah.
Now, don't they groom the community for just the right people to invite to these things?
Sometimes they do that, especially if, it's computerized. In other words, if there's certain people that have spoken out before and they're well known for doing that, they may invite them deliberately to see who is on their side. But what they usually do is they stand up there and have you, they'll throw out some idea, like, what's the first thing you think of when you say green projects? Or what's the first thing you think of when you say same-sex marriage? Or what's the first thing you think of when you say, and you could make a list of them. And they're going to look for body language. They're going to look for the raised eyebrow. They're going to look for anything like that. But more important, sometimes they ask you to make lists. What's the first thing that comes into your mind? Make a list.
Yeah.
And they don't really care that much about the list. But while you are making that list, what you can't do is concentrate on what this guy is saying. You can't really think for yourself because you're making a list. And so while you're doing that, he's looking over this group, and you're looking at the piece of paper. So that's one way that they get you. Now, for instance, let's take the vaccine issue, since you brought that up. Maybe your view on it is, look, vaccines for certain things may be great, but not everybody can not every child can handle 8 vaccines in one cocktail. That is going to be a big problem for some kids, and they're going to have huge side effects. And that's correct.
Mm-hmm. So,
the idea you might want to put on the table is, vaccines against polio and diphtheria and some of these things are all well and good, but do we really want to put it all in one cocktail? I'm questioning this. Do you have any literature on the difference between putting it in a cocktail and giving them one at a time over, spaced out over several months or years? And they're going to say, no, we don't have any literature on that, and that's where you want them to be. But they're not going to let you even put that on the table. If they've identified you, you are not going to get that thrown out on the table.
Yep.
See, what you want to do is not just antagonize this guy, because if you antagonize him right off the bat, then you're going to look like a naysayer and a troublemaker. What you want to do is get the group that doesn't have any idea what's going on there to question. You put seeds of doubt into the group. That's the way you handle it. That way you're not a naysayer, you're not a troublemaker, you're not, a crackpot. You are simply asking a question. And in the very first part of the latest edition of my manual, I give an example of how I did it, how I did exactly that. And it was a really interesting thing, and I'll tell it to you if you want to hear this, but you probably do, because this is really good.
Yeah.
Well, a few years ago when I was working at a federal agency, the Justice Department actually, they had a combination sexual harassment AIDS awareness workshop, and it was mandated for all the employees. We had to select one of 3 days. Well, most of us expected that it would all be about political correctness, but, that's the way it went. So, my colleagues, they didn't mind one way or the other. They'd seen it before. And so they all put down a date. And when they got in there, the day of the required workshop, there was a predictable facilitator. And the lady who served as this facilitator began by asking, what pops into your head as soon as I say AIDS, HIV, sexual orientation? And we're all supposed to call out something. So most of us said what we thought the woman wanted to hear: homophobia, fear, intolerance. Then she turned out the lights and showed a short film featuring interviews with homosexuals and others, and they may have been actors for all we knew, but they all decried stereotyping and went on to express incredulity that something so normal as same-sex attraction should cause a person to be ostracized. So afterward, the moderator worked without much success to generate discussion, and then turned to the topic of how one couldn't get AIDS, or the virus that causes it, HIV, from the fellow in the next cubicle, or by using the same restrooms and so on, which of course is only minimally accurate. There's bodily fluids from splash-ups and drinking fountains and all that kind of stuff. So it's moderately accurate, but not completely. But what neither my colleagues nor the moderator herself knew was that there was someone in the room, namely me, who not only understood what was going on here, but who was familiar with consensus building and psychological manipulation. So after listening to this gal's spiel for about half an hour, I raised my hand and I said, "Excuse me, I have a question." Now, this was music to this gal's ears because it meant she thought that she might be starting to connect with her unwilling subjects here, most of whom were looking at their watches. And I said, I think all of us here know the risk of catching AIDS or HIV from the persons in the next office or the bathroom stall is minimal. That's not what concerns us. What many of us are concerned about is the compromised immune systems of those who indulge in risky sexual behavior. The individual who goes on to get strains of pneumonia, tuberculosis, and other highly contagious diseases that are resistant to antibiotics and other treatments. What materials have you brought us to address that issue? Well, the lady was totally flummoxed. She never expected the question, didn't have any literature, and no snappy response. So I yawned and stretched, and I said, well, if there's nothing in your stuff there that addresses real concerns like this, I think we're done here. And I got up and proceeded to walk out, whereupon everybody else in the room, most of whom were liberal, followed me out of the room.
Wow.
Now, what did I actually do? First of all, I said, most of us think. That term, most of us know that that catching HIV, or getting HIV from the fellow in the next cubicle is minimal. Most of us are worried instead about this. Most of us are. I have made it an us instead of me thing.
Yeah, and you put them
in
the minority.
What she does. That's what she's going to do to us, and I knew it ahead of time.
Wow.
So I just threw it back at her.
Yeah. Now, this is a tricky thing, though. You mentioned in your video that this is something that you really have to practice. You got to understand it thoroughly what's going on, because if you say the wrong word, like you said, if you come out and be negative, if you know what they're there to do, which you really should know what's going on before you show up, but if you come in with both guns ablazing, they're going to quickly be able to isolate you at that point.
Absolutely. Well, I had done stuff like that many times, and so that was some help. that was one of the best ones. All the liberals even followed me out of the room. But the thing is, you have to have a mindset when you go in that I'm going to have fun with this. And if you can't do that, you need to find someone in your group who can, because not everybody's cut out for it.
Yeah.
But at least understand it so that you can go in, sit in different places in the room, and support this person who is going to do the dirty work, so to speak, for you.
What made the CDC conference work in our best interest, it wasn't even through planning, but we actually had enough people in the room that were opposed to their agenda that were naturally spread out throughout the room. So these questions just came up organically, and they did not know what to do. They didn't know how to handle it. They lost control and quickly tried to condense the presentation and shut it down, which is usually what happens if they start losing the battle.
That's it. And that's the hardest thing for us to do, is to shut. Once a moderator or facilitator or whatever you want to call them, professional provocateur, gets a hold of the psychological debate, it's really hard to take the reins away. So the best thing to do is either give them enough rope to hang themselves and then take it away, like I did, or take it away right at the get-go, like on the vaccination question, because you want to go in there, yes, with guns blazing, but you have serious questions, but you say it in a serious way, and you use an argument that they're not going to be expecting. That's the thing. You have to do what is unpredictable, not what is predictable.
And they try to shift gears immediately. Some of the things that I've seen them use personally is that if I were to ask a question, for example, that's rather uncomfortable and that they didn't want to answer, they often will answer a question that I didn't ask. They will reword it and then answer it. They will do a number of different things. Or even though I've actually seen them point over to someone else and say, oh, did you have a question? Or what were you going to say about that? I want to hear what you had. Try to get someone else from the table to actually interrupt the questioning or the conversation. But there's a number of tactics that they use to stay away from those. And you really just have to reassert yourself and re-ask the question until they either A, answer it, or B, becomes obviously clear that they're just simply not going to ask it or answer it for some reason, some unknown reason.
Right. Well, that's the thing. It's difficult to do, but it's something you absolutely have to do. And I point out in this manual, you have to practice. You have to get with somebody and practice these techniques. But more than that, you have to learn the techniques and the principles of psych war. That's one of the things that I really hit very hard. And I also, go into the loose logic. The problem is that really high school students back in the 30s and 40s used to study in high school a subject called rhetoric, philosophy, and, things like that. It's not there anymore. So they don't know what fraudulent argument is.
Reality and fiction are mixed.
What thought disruption is. They don't know any of the methods of loose logic, for example. They don't even know what logic really entails, and they don't know what a fallacy is. They don't know what an oversimplification, a hasty generalization, a false analogy, a hypothesis contrary to fact, circular reasoning. They don't know any of this stuff. So I had to, that's the kind of things that's in this manual and that I teach in my seminar, and then I give self-tests. I give the tests actually when I'm in a seminar, but there's keyed self-tests in the book, in the manual. So until you've learned this stuff, it's going to be really difficult for you to do the kind of job I did and feel comfortable with it.
Yeah, I've been aware of this type of conditioning for a while. I've gotten so much more detail more recently from studying your material, and really being faced with this is something that I have to deal with at a municipal level. But it's incredible how scientific and calculated this is. It is by no accident, which is why I had to have you on to show that this is a structured thing that's happening, and we're being programmed. We're actually we're cutting our own throat. We're thinking it's our idea when people come out of these consensus meetings, And somehow, some way, we have got to put this logic back into it. Now, we're joined today with Mrs. Beverly Eakman, award-winning author, and she's been a writer for the U.S. Department of Justice, NASA. She was the editor-in-chief there, their official newspaper. And we're talking today about group manipulation, how it's affected the public school systems, and we're turning out generations of new good global citizens. Forget about America and our founding principles here. And not only is our public schools being affected, not only are our kids being pumped out in as mindless automatons, but they've got a plan for us too. And right now we're seeing it in the streets. And it's in the form of pushing sustainable development. And I'd like to spend the second half of the show here talking about that and kind of relate, if you could, for the folks, what types of little meetings are we looking for here? Who would possibly be putting on meetings that would push sustainable development as defined in the United Nations Agenda 21?
Oh, there's a lot of organizations that will do that sort of thing, including some you wouldn't even expect. But, the National Education Association would do it. The Education Commission of the States, the People for the American Way, the American Federation of Teachers, the Rockefeller Foundation, and then, of course, all these phony baloney green, the Sierra Clubs, that kind of thing.
They're a big one. I saw their name all over this.
But there's others, too, and some that you wouldn't even expect. I mean, even NASA has succumbed to this stuff. I mean, I was so shocked. And I called Michael Kaufman from a NASA Gaylord, and I was pretending to tell him what had just happened. They had a speaker, and the advertised topic of his speech was going to be, satellite communications and how they have come along from the early days to the present, the historical development of them. And so we were all looking forward to that. Well, we got in there, and there's at least 1,000 people sitting in this auditorium, and suddenly it's all about global warming and a slideshow. And he was very slick, but it wasn't the guy that was going to present the satellite thing. I mean, there was some mention of satellites in passing, but it was not the guy that was going to speak, and it wasn't the presentation that we had signed up to hear.
The old bait and switch.
And I was furious, really, because this guy was so slick that I don't think a lot of the people there, despite their PhDs and whatever else they have, really understood that, because it was so entertaining. I mean, he had little cartoons and a PowerPoint slide that were funny, and he was funny, and by the time you got through, you didn't realize you'd been had. But the message was clear, that if NASA didn't sign on to global warming, they're going to lose their funding.
Now, do we see? Is that what's happening here? Are we seeing that now?
In fact, I just got an email, and it was, I think it was from the Washington Times or Post. I'm not sure which one, but they all have it now. I mean, it's all over now in various newspapers. But that NASA's funding levels and days may be numbered. I mean, but we didn't use them for the things that we could have. We could have, geosynchronous orbiting satellites to garner solar power to a grid on Earth, microwaving it to a grid on Earth, and then go all over the country with it. I mean, we had that on the drawing board in 1978. We never followed up on it. I mean, we could have been doing something with NASA and our satellites and so forth, and instead we wasted it. I mean, not totally wasted it. Hubble's very interesting, and of course, everything to do with outer space and black holes and, the sunspots and all the rest of it is very interesting. But if you really want to get the public involved with it and feel like they're a part of NASA, then that was what you should have done. But they didn't. So now their days are, maybe numbered because everything is entitlement programs. And whether we have signed on to global warming enough to suit the powers that be is another question.
It seems that some of the agencies are going rogue, like the EPA. They're not going to wait for the administration to do anything. They're just going to assume that they have that that authority, and they're going to incorporate it on their own. And they really almost left with that, because after the whole ClimateGate thing, we found out that much of that information was lies and fabrications.
That is the amazing thing, is that after that, I really kind of thought, well, that may be it for them, that now they can't, they can't pull this kind of thing. But, boy, I was wrong.
Yeah, they stuck their head in the sand, pretend it didn't happen, and they're going to push forward with the lies. And they've got a lot invested in it, so I understand why they're pushing, but this is clearly a fraud. What I was taught in college, I went to school right here at UMass, and I had instructors very, very clearly prove to me that glaciation is something that happens on a cyclic basis. We have it over and over and over again. The government has known about this fact for quite some time, and they're using the environment and some of the natural things that occur in the environment to really push total control. Yeah. And that's what this sustainable development really is. Oh man, once I got into it and started really digging into what the provisions were, what it was calling for, the biodiversity assessment report, which came right out and said that private property is unsustainable. Single family homes, dams, ski areas, forestry, all these things that made our nation great are now at peril, where we may lose them to government control. And I don't see where the government has been able to manage too many federally run programs. And this goes beyond the federal government. This originates at the United Nations.
Yeah. And so does most of education. That's coming through UNESCO.
Right.
And it has for a long time, and the sex education programs and so on. And this is what people don't understand. And another thing they don't understand is that a lot of their things that they mandates and that kind of a thing actually are, there were trial balloons once, and they came through something called the Commission on Uniform State Laws. And what that is a way to get the state to draft all similar bills so that it sounds maybe a little different in title, but the particulars are the same. And they do that, and pretty soon it's all over the country, and then they can go national.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, it's very, very underhanded.
Now, how much of a foothold has this whole sustainable development and smart growth got in your area?
Well, Maryland got rid of Agenda 20. Certain parts of Maryland, let's put it that way, got managed to defeat Agenda 21 stuff, and most people didn't even know it was happening. But they did anyway. And the thing of it is, it's going to be just like the marijuana law. It's going to keep coming back and back and back, or the marijuana issue, medicinal marijuana, which, of course, isn't medicinal at all. They're going to keep on with that. It doesn't matter how many people don't like it. It doesn't matter anything. They're just going to do what they want to do.
But we can count on them using this consensus process, right? Yeah. I mean, they're pretty fond of this. I don't think this is going to go away. They'll come back again.
They'll keep coming back. If you keep coming back as often as they come back, yes, you can defeat them.
Wow.
You just have to have as much stick-to-itiveness as they do, and that's going to be the toughie. That's the tough part, is keeping up. I mean, people, let's face it, they're tired when they come home from a busy day.
Yeah,
they want to just kick back. They want to order in a pizza.
Yeah. And they're hardworking people. I agree with you. And what I see in my local officials is, the majority of them are good-hearted people. They want to do right by their community. But you are exactly right. They do have other lives. These are volunteers. Very, very few of them are even paid for their service. And, it's pitched to them in a flowery packaging by these professionals, these change agents that you described.
Right.
And it is so easy for them to say, well, sustainability is a good idea, and they go along with it, and they're not seeing what's just below the surface. No. And really, moreover, they don't realize that what has been set up around them, these people that are pitching sustainability to them and smart growth and rewilding, they come from a Soviet system of councils. That's what we've got set up now. We are giving up our local rights and authority to regional entities. And here in Massachusetts, I talked about this with Mr. Kaufman, is that we've done away with most of our counties. So the protections, the constitutional protections that we used to have to our county government, they're all relegated to giving out restraining orders now. County government's gone, and no more than did they get rid of it, and they started talking right out the other side of their mouth saying, we need to regionalize. That would be so much more efficient.
Yep.
And up come these Soviet councils, the regional planners. They're unelected. There's not a ballot box in this state that we can get rid of these guys if we don't like what we're seeing.
Yeah. And so what really even more upsetting is that some of the people that are implementing this kind of thing, this regional stuff, don't even realize that is the Soviet model.
Right. You're right.
They're that clueless, but then, hey, we've had 40 years of leftist education. What did we expect?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what happens when you have that kind of thing. So turning it around now is going to be really tough. It's going to really mean that we've got to privatize the school process completely, but that's going to be a real tough nut to sell. The only thing that actually might help in a backhanded sort of way is the fact that, all these school shootings and everything and psychiatric drugs, people may have enough of it for their own reasons that they say, you know what, we don't want the public school anymore. It's too big, it's too awkward, it's too chaotic, and it's too dangerous.
They love to take those school shootings and focus on the fact that we need gun control.
Oh, yeah.
And they forget to mention that the kids involved in the overwhelming majority of these school shootings are also on these psychotropic drugs.
Psychotropic drugs, and a lot of them have been in trouble a million times. I mean, especially in the inner cities.
Now, tell us really quick about the Anti-Coercion Education Act that you were involved with.
Oh, okay. I wrote a bill that was just thrown out there, the Anti-Coercion Education Act, and I think it was 6 states had adopted the thing. By the time it was all said and done, they liked it, and I just kind of threw it out there, and people picked it up off my website, actually, and proliferated it. And what it does basically is tell people that they I guess you'd say the superintendent of schools and the principal. That's who you should address it to. And it tells them that you have certain expectations, that you are to be informed when certain types of questionnaires are given out. You are to be informed when your child is misbehaving. You're to all kinds of things that you are to be informed about, and you do it in a nice way. I have it written in a very nice way, and then what you do is you get a lot of people together to do it at the same time, to mail such a letter and do just what they do, change a word here and a word there so it doesn't look like it's all the same letter, mass letter, and then that way they can't pigeonhole you. And you say, we're really sorry that we have to do this in today's environment, but I'm sure you understand. We're going to turn this over to our attorney and just keep it on file with our attorney so that, for our protection and yours. You can play this game just like they can. I mean, this is it, So, but you do list all the expectations right up front that you have so that you don't have to go in the middle of the year and say, hey, look, I warned you about this.
And that's what happened to me. I wound up as a homeschool parent myself for that exact reason, as I kept on getting blindsided at the end of the year, and it was an annual event for them to try to drug my son. I could not get it through their head that the absolute last thing that I wanted to do is get him on a medication. I wanted to explore every other possible avenue, techniques for him to learn. It turns out there was never anything wrong with him. Miraculously, when I wound up co-chair of the Parent Advisory Council, things got better for him in terms of their evaluation of him. However, it got to the point where I was just unacceptable.
Right.
They didn't want to give me the right time of day, and one event that by rights I should have pushed it and had the school psychologist arrested, but I just handed him a letter and withdrew my kids. And It was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was the best thing I probably have committed to doing for my children while they were children.
Yeah, that's it. It is a hard thing to do, and hopefully, homeschool isn't for everybody. Not everybody has the patience. That's why we send our kids to school, But you have to take the ball, and you have to be the boss, and It's very difficult to do these things sometimes, but we have to do them, and we have to take the time, and we can't just veg out in front of the TV because, we're really at risk now, and that comes before everything else.
Yeah. Now, is there something, can parents feel that there is something that they could do? Could they become part of their school committee and actually have changes to the curriculum?
Well, yes and no. It depends on the school district, of course, and sometimes they can weigh in with things. But generally speaking, the powers that be at the district and county and so forth level are already made up before you ever get in there, and so even if they allow you to look over something, and a lot of times they actually escort people off the public school campus who are looking through the offerings, the books, the curriculum, and stuff like that. They don't want any of that. I mean, it used to be that you could just, hey, I'd like to spend a day in my child's classroom. Because if he's acting up, especially, I want to see what he's doing and see what what maybe I can do about it and that sort of thing. So you used to be able to do that, and you certainly could in the private school. But nowadays, in the public school, I've heard of people, and they've called me and said they were actually escorted off the ground.
Yeah. It's terrible. They don't want you in there. If you are able to get an appointment and come in, it's days or even weeks after. Yep. And of course, you get patted down, go through the metal detector.
Yeah, that's it. And see, that's an acclimation for sort of thing.
Yeah.
And I've really worked very hard on, in many of my articles recently, talk about getting people acclimated to things that on the surface of it, if you just sprung it on them, they wouldn't never stand for.
Yeah, well, a child fresh out of the public education system probably would not have a problem flying at all in today's environment.
They don't care. In fact, I've heard them say that. I've heard them say such things as, well, we can just, if you don't like it, just take all the headbands off your head and the barrettes out of your hair, and it's worth our safety. And when I say, hey, I'd rather be dead than go through this, that's probably overstating it. But, for me, at my age, that is, you just don't stand for that sort of thing. Yeah.
Well, we have slipped far, far away from what our founding principles were, and we've got to get it back. We don't have a lot of time to do it. Now, people can get more information here, and I really recommend that you go and visit beverlye.com. Take a look at the material out there that's available. There's some great information all over the internet. You've written for some great magazines and stuff. I'm trying to find my list here. News with Views is one of the places that you do op-ed pieces for.
Yes.
WorldNet Daily, Raiders News, American Opinion, many more. I highly recommend.
Yeah, the New American has both a magazine, hardcover, and online e-zine. That's what they're calling them now.
Yeah.
Online service too. So, and a lot of them do. Chronicles of the American Culture. And I've written for the Washington Times occasionally and so forth too. And I have a lot of books. So I've pretty much covered that. And I couldn't put links to everything, so I just recommend that people put my name in the Google search. And
that's right. And you'll definitely be able to find her books here, Cloning of the American Mind, and the sequel, Walking Targets, and your pamphlet for deprogramming people so that they can go into these consensus sessions and know what to expect. This is going to be key in winning this debate. I'm confident of that. So, Ms. Beverly Eakman, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. We're going to have to do a follow-up. There's too much information for us to squeeze in.
It was my pleasure to do it, and thank you very much.
Oh, it was quite a pleasure having you on Red Pill Politics, and I want to thank my listeners again for tuning in this week. I've been listening to WXOJLP 103.3 FM in Northampton, streaming live on Al Gore's internet at valleyfreeradio.org. And be sure to email me if you want a copy of this show. Please send your show ideas, comments, and hate mail to redpillpolitics@masslpa.org. I'd be happy to get you over any of the old shows and answer any questions and even entertain some thoughts for upcoming shows. So in closing, I want to thank my very special guest, Mrs. Beverly Eakman. Thank you to my listeners. Fly your flags high, keep your powder dry, and we'll see you all next week.